How do IoT technologies help influence buying behavior? On this segment from the Dell TIA Now studio at TIA 2016, we'll talk about interpreting user behavior by incorporating IoT data. I'm Andy Castonguay, your host today, and joining me are Brett Cortese, President and Chief Executive Officer at Universal Mind, and Greg Carley, Vice President of Product Design and Strategy at Fjord Austin at Accenture Interactive. So thank you both for joining me today. This is an exciting opportunity because you guys represent a piece of the IoT development market that I think is a growing, not only in terms of importance, but based on our survey information, companies are really looking for a full service design organization that can help them from iteration and design ideation all the way through to getting it out, getting it ready to produce and out to the market. So I was hoping to at least start off with each of you providing a little bit of a snippet as to what your company focuses on and the types of organizations that you typically work with.
Sure. So Universal Mind, we work with a wide variety of different organizations. What we say is that we solve a big problem, and that big problem is that most organizations now they have to be a digital company. They need to be a software company, but they weren't set up in that manner. They were set up as a retail company. They were set up as a telecom company. They were set up as manufacturing. But what we've found as we've worked across all these different verticals is these people have the same issues, the same challenges, and that is to how do they take advantage of the new digital world, the new digital technologies, and turn these new capabilities into business assets as opposed to a risk or maintenance headache and all that sort of thing. And you'd be amazed how when you go across those verticals and go across a lot of our different clientele, that they have this same problem of trying to make that flow. So we've really been focusing on how to help them in that journey. Everything from strategy, everything from user experience, agile transformation, development, DevOps, all those things right along the line to help guide them, give them a picture of where they need to be and how to deliver on that and be successful.
Wow, okay, that's a lot under one roof.
Yeah.
Walk us through what Fjord does.
Sure, yeah. At Fjord, we really have two offerings. One is sort of the strategy service design, similar to what you had described, where we're really uncovering the big problem, figuring out how you could digitize the business and really kind of figure out how you can actually transform them to be successful in the future. And then the second half is actually the product realization part, that once we take this service design blueprint and identify all these opportunities, then we'll focus on which ones are possible, what's the best technology to go and implement, and then figure out at a product strategy level, how do we make this product successful? What are the user needs? What's going to change behavior to make it something that people want to adopt? And our intent is to take those products to market. So not only is it all this theory behind what we think businesses need to do, but it's actually putting products into market that allow users to start using it to where we can then get sort of launch and learn data and then improve, beyond launch. We like to call that first iteration the minimum lovable product, which is, and you probably heard it too, but it's we used to call it minimum viable product, but that's more business term, and we don't want just what business goals do we need to launch a product, but we actually want to focus on the user to say, when we put a product in market, what's going to make a user want to interact and adopt this. So it's pretty important differentiation.
Well, that sort of comprehensive and holistic vision that you guys are both describing, I think is a really interesting one in the sense that it syncs up quite nicely with a lot of the survey work that we do with enterprises. So a survey that we did with TIA in the last few months points out that when companies are looking to develop an IoT solution, the key types of companies that they look for as a trusted advisor or partner tend to be organizations like service integrators, systems integrators, but also end-to-end solution providers. Those that are willing to sit down and develop a strategy, as well as design process and get all the way through to launching that product. But one of the key elements that I find is that companies are interested in trying to develop or play a lead in that, but they simply don't have that sort of comprehensive methodology that you both have described, as well as the right skill sets, within their organization to make sure that it's a successful launch in one way, shape, or form. Can you talk a little bit about how you interact with companies and how because the vision that you described is not only very broad, but it requires a lot of work, I would imagine, on the part of your company client.
Yeah, I mean, what we've found, and what you'll see if you're just going with, a lot of companies have found if we got these great designers, that they're just fantastic, or this great tech group, we got all these folks, but wait a minute, we're not getting the output that we would expect. We're not getting the results that we would expect. And why is it taking a year to get a product out the door, a solution out the door? And what we found is you need this comprehensive capability to be able to look at the entire continuum of what's going on in your organization. We'll find like, oh, if you're just focusing on dev, well, that's great, and our dev teams are agile, but a lot of times we'll find that they're being cut off at the knees because of the way the budgeting process works, right? The way, you're going to have, well, we want these features delivered by this date, and that gets handed to a development team that's agile. Well, that all completely breaks down. So being able to focus and have a broad view across the organization, across these different competencies, allows you to really push through and allow for organizational success, which is what is really needed today to be successful.
And when we think about, so the key topic here today is thinking about interpreting IoT data into design and vice versa, because you want to be able to create a design that is capable of essentially establishing through any number of devices or sensors, what have you, a lot of data that's hopefully useful. Most of it can be with the right, but you've got to design it in such a way that you're not just creating a massive cloud of useless data. So let's talk a little bit about this sort of concept of designing to generate data, but also eventually to make it useful.
Yeah, so I think data is becoming companies' most valuable asset. And so with that in mind, we need to start building sort of a staff that supports that. And one of the first things that are really emerging from a design perspective is data is that new medium, right? That where in the past they were visual designers or writers or whatever, that were really in pixels and color and whatever else. Well, now it's actually starting with the data. What can I do with that data? How do, what's the input, what's the output, what's the application of each of these? And a lot of times that's not visual at all in an interface on an app or whatever. And so, this is what's leading into invisible UI or zero UI or these types of things to where, Internet of Things is actually presenting us with a really interesting challenge, because before it was all about sort of the human-centered design, what does that user need?
Right.
But now we actually have the physical environment, the place, as well as what are all the other connected sensors or devices within that environment. So it's people, places, things, instead of just people. And so this is actually changing the way that you have to approach and think about solving problems within sort of this new era of designing for data. So with that being said, I think you're going to have positions like automation designers. How can we take the data and actually eliminate a lot of the mundane tasks that were previously done through a particular experience and that type of thing. And of course, I think you also have new inputs and things like Amazon Echo that can now just listen and respond completely through voice is pretty powerful, considering I don't need an application on a phone in order to do that.
Right. And the way you've described it, to me, represents an important growth of context around a given device or experience, in the sense that in many instances, whether it was a vehicle or even a smartphone, up until a few years ago, when companies were designing those were sort of single-use products, right? In a particular way. But now, with what you're talking about, with sort of a zero design element, it's got to take that entire data and also physical context into account when you're trying to design the system, I would imagine. And so how does that translate into your work process? So instead of just thinking about, well, this has to be a really nice design, et cetera, but it has to start to blend more broadly.
So my view of a lot of this is that I think the IoT data is great. All this stuff that you said, I agree with. But one of the things that I think it needs to be looked at as, there are core principles around how you're going about design, about the design process, the development process, and you want to get those core principles in place. Make sure that's solid and in part of your organization, as part of your organization, how it operates. Then you can be adding these new capabilities, the way data is being brought in, the way you're going to integrate, you're going to contextualize an experience. All those things can become part of your process. But as an organization, you got to get these table stakes put down in place so you can take advantage of the data, you can take advantage of IoT or anything else that's coming along, AI, as you had mentioned earlier today. And so those are the things that we also want to be concentrating on. A lot of stuff is coming out there that's fantastic, but you really want to be getting your base layer in place to be able to take full advantage of that in your business.
So, and to a large extent, one of the exciting, but I would imagine also challenging aspects of designing for the IoT space is that it's a constant evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in the space for a number of years now, and what I'm looking at today is vastly different from what I was looking at 3 years ago. And that has to impact both the physical and technical design, but also, are you thinking about what consumers or an enterprise user will look, how that person will look at the design today versus 3 years from now? And you have to build in some sort of mutability to the solution, whatever that may be, to allow for change over time when it's finally in the field?
Yeah, it's and not just change, but I think that there's so many devices that are going to come out between now and the future. I think the quote we saw in John Donovan's, 50 million connected devices by 2020, and when you look at a number that large, I mean, you can't really say this isn't happening. This is very, very much an inevitable thing that we're having to solve, and it's a wicked problem, right? I mean, none of us are backing off saying, oh, well, we'll worry about it when somebody else figures it out, but you have to kind of be bulletproof with what you're building now to say, we don't know what's going to get connected, but we know that there's certain languages, like whether it's Zigbee or Z-Wave or whatever, that's going to, and there'll be a hub, whether it's a Smart Things or whatever, that everything connects to. But right now, it's still single devices that are only as smart as the programming that you put into them.
Right.
So where the things that get a lot of traction are, I can turn a light on with my smartphone app. And if I connect the door lock to this, or I connect a camera, then you can create these programs to do additional things. So, if somebody knocks on the door, you can have a picture of the camera. It can now text it to me. I could respond through my phone saying, hey, I'm not home. Here, let me unlock the door for you, those kinds of things. But I don't think that's really a smart system of devices yet. And that's why we feel like the missing piece here is still artificial intelligence, to start learning who the different actors are within this space.
Right.
Know me versus you versus my daughter. You can put securities around each of us to where I have access to certain things that I may not want my daughter to have. But I think ultimately the power comes into when all these devices are really working together. And I'm going to use the same example that we used earlier, that I want to be able to really, in the room, just look over to the corner and say, turn that light off, and have that particular light that's a connected smart device understand what I'm doing because I'm pointing at it, I'm making eye contact with it, it hears my voice, it sees my gesture, and so there's an intent out of this that machine that's sitting over there understands what I'm doing as a human, and I'm not really having to adapt with pulling my app out, selecting the app, selecting lights, selecting living room, selecting whatever obscure name I've given that. So that's like 4 or 5 steps versus being able to just react to it like you would naturally, just like you and I are communicating, that interaction between machines and people need to be more natural as if we're communicating.
Well, there's an element which, and I've heard from a number of designers, the percentage changes. But the idea is that as a consumer, if you were working with a device or a piece of software, every additional step that you have to take to get on that final path of doing what it is that you want, there's a pretty sizable percentage of people that just say, you know what, I've gotten too far, this is too complicated, I'll do it another way. And they sort of abandon the process. How much value then do you get out of the consumer behavior and usage data from your products coming back to you to help identify where those barriers are, where those bottlenecks in terms of experience are? Can you
It's absolutely critical. I mean, throughout the process of creating products, getting feedback at all the right points are just absolutely critical. We have a spin-off product that we developed many years ago, And we, just for an example, we started things up, we got things moving. People weren't getting through the sign-in process. We went and we got to the email. We went, talked to some of those people, found out, hey, why did you stop at this part? And it was, well, because they didn't want to share this type of data to get in there and mess with it. So we ended up putting that data up there for them to mess with. Boom, signups went up a huge amount. I mean, that's just one example. But getting feedback, having a structure to be able to input that feedback, output that feedback, all those types of things are absolutely critical to the process. And in an iterative process, you can make these little course corrections that are going to make huge differences.
And I think what I would add to that is that is exactly what human-centered design is. It's constantly getting that user feedback every step of the process so that you're not forgetting about the user needs are probably more important than the business needs in most cases. And when you can get the two to come together, it's awesome, right? Because the business wins, and then of course you're driving towards behavior and adoption from a user standpoint.
But then does that also change the nature of the relationship that you have with your clients, in the sense that I get the sense from both of you that your organizations could help create, design, and execute on a product or a solution and turn it over to the company and let them run it. But at the same time, you have expertise in understanding and making those adjustments based on the data that you're getting back. So does that start to change the nature of your relationship into more of a long-term partnership around that individual device or solution that you develop?
I would say yes, but even on shorter term engagements where you're just doing maybe one product release and all that, it changes the relationship, and that people were used to, okay, what am I getting? What features are going to be in it? What's going to be going out? And a lot of times you can say, well, wait a minute. I know this is the way this has been done, and you're used to, and it feels responsible to make sure you're getting this stuff, this information. But if you're not able to go in and be iterative and make a course correction, you're going to lose the ability. You're going to lose the benefits of that. So in terms of the relationship with our clients, getting that trust so they understand, hey, they're going to guide us through this process. Hey, building that trust is something that's really important. But that definitely moving from a waterfall sort of scenario to an agile scenario can be scary for our customers and for the world, right? But being able to show that, wait a minute, the way you were doing it before might feel responsible, but it causes big problems. And look at the results that you're having. Let's try it this way. Let's get it moving. And we've been doing that pretty successfully.
And do you find that that iterative element also changes consumer expectations or end user expectations? Because it feels like not so long ago, a product when you purchased it was complete and it was fully baked, and if there was an upgrade, well, you had to trade in one for the other. But the software process of doing constant updates has infiltrated the physical product realm, and in fact the physical product realm is obviously fully infused with software and OSS elements these days that are important to the longevity and the performance of it. So do you find that in your process that there are scheduled checkups with your clients to look at the data to make sure that it's performing in the way that you had originally intended?
Well, you hit on a great point that software design never ends. Right, because there's always new operating systems coming out, there's new features coming out with new products. So constantly you have to do exactly that. I usually suggest that you do it on trimesters or quarters, that you go back and you kind of look at the performance, you go in and you look at sort of the behavioral data to see what are people really using, are there areas that they're not using, because there could be a feature that you have in there that's not necessary that you could remove. But I think more importantly, there's also new products always coming out. So remember, like when sort of the wearables came out, the Apple Watch, or some of the stuff that the Android Wear is bringing, suddenly what you used to do on your smartphone, you're now doing up on your wrist and totally changing the way that you interact with this information. So that's the constant sort of dynamic change that I think you're going to continue to see in this space, that there's always going to be something bigger and better coming out, and it's coming out every year. It's not just like, oh, well, we predict this in 5 years. So much of this is really just constantly happening, so you really have to make some hard choices of like where are you going to bring in the highest value with some of these things. How do I adapt this digital product that I'm sort of putting out there? But I think also you can get into sort of launching a product that has an overwhelming number of features. And so oftentimes it's better to start with that smaller set and kind of see from the user feedback, what are the things that they're asking for, what are the things that you think might be able to add in there. And a lot of times, just once you have a product in market, that the users will help guide that way, and I think that's probably the more appropriate way to do it. Your timelines are shorter, you get products in market faster, all those things that you know our enterprise clients are asking for. Like,
No, it feels to me like a significant step change in terms of product development, but also the interaction with clients and end users and products, so that there's that feedback loop, and there seems to be better understanding that as a user, I'm actually providing important feedback to the design group that put this out there. But also, I would imagine, creates certain new challenges. So some of our clients are device manufacturers, and the design would be contemplated in a medical device instance, for example. You end up with a 10-year lifespan that it needs to function. It needs coverage. It needs to be a reasonably mobile product. But all of those elements then start to be challenging because the realm of connectivity is constantly changing, especially with cellular networks, constantly upgrading and being decommissioned. And so while software never ends, it feels like in some ways the products are never ending at this point. Is that a difficult thing to get across to companies, or in your experience, are companies already there and have already embraced this change?
Well, we certainly, one of the things we advise our clients to do in terms of a little way of changing thinking is don't look at these things as projects. That's a good way to fall into kind of a trap. We're going to look at this and it's going to be a big bang and we're banking everything. This is a project, and they're used to budgeting that way and those types of things. Look at this as a product. Don't send your kid to kindergarten and you're not done when he graduates kindergarten, right? There's a lot that's going to have to grow. There's a lot that you're going to have to continue to do. Needs are going to change. All these things are going to grow. So having more of a product mindset as opposed to a project mindset really starts to get, and you need to do that. These things are going to live in the wild, whether they're in medical devices, a little bit different. You can but these digital products that are going out there, you can update, you can change, you can get feedback. And if you're not thinking like that, you're going to really cut short what the benefits are going to be to the
That makes sense. I mean, to a large extent, when we're talking to companies and they're asking for advice on connectivity modules, it used to be that you could get away with asking the question, well, what does your device or solution need in terms of data throughput and latency, frequency of interaction with the network? And you could kind of call it a day at that point, right? Because power consumption would be the only other one that I would consider sort of fundamental in that. But if you don't ask the question, where or how do you expect this product to evolve over the next 5 years in the field once it's out there? You're kind of shortchanging your potential.
You're not competitive.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so to talk us through, from your standpoint, like, how do you engage with clients to get them over that hump and get them to understand that the nature of product design has completely shifted here?
Yeah, one thing I'm going to add to what you were just talking about, so I think we've spent 10 or 15 years really digitizing everything, and it was all like websites and mobile apps and things. But we've kind of gone full circle now that we have cloud services and whatever else that we can take sensors and share things into physical items and things like that. So I even think the physical products are changing as a result. Things like 3D printers allow us to change out a section, maybe not the whole thing of a product. I think being able to do software updates, through the cloud, pretty amazing. So, I think the nature of products aren't necessarily meant to be one-off products anymore. And I think what you're even seeing with wearables, that once like a Fitbit is made, but then what else can you use that wearable Fitbit for that may not be for the health tracking and whatever, that it's finding as many different uses for these products that we're building so that you're really expanding this capability. And, again, Uber is a good example that they're not really just trying to move people around. Eventually, they want to deliver everything. So they built this great platform that can deliver people, and that's the model they entered the market with.
Right.
But they could get into package delivery and a whole lot of other things using the same platform. And I think that's where this gets really, really powerful. And this is where companies really need to be thinking, is not the singular use as much anymore, but what's the broader way of designing and building things that you can find multiple uses out of it. And sometimes it's even going to be driven by the users, that you build something and users will find a new way to use that you didn't even think about. And then sometimes that evolves into a whole new direction for a company.
Right. Well, the last question I want to pose to you guys is really thinking about the future. So there are a couple things. How do you, let's give it two parts. The first part would be, how do you think about future-proofing products? Because if this is the path forward for design, that future-proofing, either using standards or design approaches, I would imagine has to be pretty fundamental. And then the second part of that is, how does your own workflow and process change thinking about that 5-year projection?
Yeah, you can't really ever future-proof a product in a time and place, right? But what you can future-proof is your approach to it, right? Be able to iterate, be able to get feedback, be able to move quickly, and then obviously there's best practices around how you're going to develop this to be able to take advantage of open APIs, all these different things. Be able to iterate, be able to move quickly and use that user feedback, and be able to have platforms and systems that are going to accommodate that. You're never going to be able to put a product out now and just say, okay, it's future-proof. And you can see, I mean, I'm a big SmartThings guy, Samsung SmartThings guy, and we have a couple things around the house, but watching that platform improve over just 6 months, and I mean, they've had their issues, but they've got a lot of different things they're dealing with, right? A lot of different devices pulling this all in, but you can see they're focusing on stability, they're moving this way, they're iterating, and that's exciting to see. So you're not going to future-proof anything now. You future-proof your organization, you future-proof your methodologies, and that's how we advise to go about it.
And from your perspective, are there different techniques or approaches that you use?
I would definitely say that the 5-year view is a lot more difficult these days, and I think looking at a much shorter product cycle is important. That even the 18-month product cycles are starting to shorten down to less than 12 months. I mean, usually a 6 to 9 month engagement is sort of the long version.
Right.
And if you can actually get something done in 3 or 4 months to where you're at least doing the proof of concept, you're getting the prototype out, you're getting a pilot launch, you're doing less research up front and you're doing more research once it's in the user's hands to start doing this. But I still think, going back to where we sort of started this conversation, I think the focus should be on the data. I mean, if you could get the data in the same place to where it doesn't really matter what form factor you're pushing it out to, and you're being smart with that data, that you're only surfacing what the user needs within the moment that they need it, versus trying to just shove everything out and let the user sort of fumble their way through it. So it's getting more predictive, it's getting more contextual, and it's getting more meaningful. And if you start checking these boxes, then that's where you change behaviors, where users go, God, I can't believe how I ever did anything without this.
Right.
And that's the moment we all strive for, right? Is how do you delight that user in such a way that they forget how things used to be, and this is the only way forward, for the rest of their life. And
right. Well, I think that's a great point to end on, and so I want to thank you both for participating today. This was a lot of fun. Because from my perspective, our entire world is IoT and M2M, and understanding the vanguard of design and how that's changing on a constant basis, it has been really enlightening. So thank you both. And with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us at TIA 2016 from the Dell TIA Now studio. For more coverage, please visit tianow.org. Take care.